Staff Sergeant Justin J. Brame was born on July 11, 1981 in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. He has two brothers, Adam and Nathan. Neither one has ever been in the military. When he was a little kid, his parents owned a farm. His mom now works as an accountant, and his dad now works with computers and IT. After graduating high school, Mr. Brame worked in a grocery store and for a construction company doing roofing. When he started to think about going to college, he realized it was going to be something he could not afford, so he began to look for alternative options. A mentor of his growing up really encouraged him to join the military as an alternative to going into college. Mr. Brame also decided that going into the military would help him make more out of his life. He thought it would help him have a stronger work ethic. Mr. Brame decided to join the military after meeting with several Army recruiters. Once he made his decision, he headed off to basic training. He arrived in the middle of February, which he soon discovered was a bad time to join. All of the 18-year-olds had joined right after they graduated from high school, so since he was the only one that joined in February, he spent a couple of weeks on kitchen duty while they waited for enough people to come so they could start a basic training class. Once his class started, he had to endure the harshness of his instructors. Mr. Brame recalls,
I remember the main thing that they would do when you got there is they were they were mean, they were aggressive, they always screaming, always in your face, and their goal is to basically break down your spirit, break down your mental capacity, just break you completely down, and then build you back up the way the military wants you to be.
After basic training, Mr. Brame moved on to his specialized training. His AIT was a fire support specialist, so he went off to fire support school. The job of a fire support specialist is to identify targets and call for artillery. Mr. Brame chose to be a fire support specialist because the military had a high bonus program for a fire support specialist. The high bonus was because of the high death rate in that field. Mr. Brame also chose to do some work with computers and military intelligence. He also learned some specialized training as a combat lifesaver, military police, and various other medical courses. While in basic and specialized training, Mr. Brame was forced to adapt to military life. This was his first time being away from home for a lengthy amount of time, and he said that they all just had to adjust to their way of life. They didn't really have a choice. Mr. Brame was eventually shipped overseas where he worked with military intelligence. His group of 9 or 10 men would receive information and disseminate the information to places where it was the most useful. His group of men strived to proactively send information to other groups to prevent people from getting hurt or worse. This group of men that he spent the majority of his time with became very close. Mr. Brame explained it as they were as close as brothers. He arrived overseas in 2003, right after Saddam Hussein had been captured. When they arrived, the people were welcoming and they treated the soldiers as heroes. The Iraqi people were promised a democracy by the Americans, so they were treated very well in the beginning. Mr. Brame remarks that as his time overseas continued, their attitudes began to change.
But throughout my 16 months there, their attitudes really started to change drastically throughout the time period. Because at first when we got there, they're like, yay, America, they're heroes, they caught Saddam, and now they're going to give us democracy and a better life. And here we were, a year into it, and not much was changing, and they started getting a little restless. So at first, when we first got there wasn't too much in the form of combat, just regular small arms fires. When they would, you get a handful of guys that were out there, and they would try to ambush our convoys and stuff when we were going by. Roadside bombs was a big thing back then. They call IEDs.
Mr. Brame's main job overseas, along with working with military intelligence, was to run supply convoys from Kuwait to Baghdad. They did Quick Reactionary Forces, or QFR, and recon missions. Their QFR missions were counter-ambush missions. If they would get word that an attack was going to happen, they would go the day before and wait to see what would happen. If something did materialize, they would counter-ambush and make sure their convoys were safe. Asked what they did during downtime overseas, his first answer was sleep. Although they weren't given much time off, Mr. Brame made the most of his. He went camel riding and also visited various places throughout the country. He was able to visit the Temple of Ur, which is a significant biblical site. Ur is where Abraham, an Old Testament prophet, spent the majority of his life and where he was later buried. When his 16 months overseas came to an end, Mr. Brame flew home. He arrived at the West Virginia airport and called a neighbor to pick him up. Following his return, Mr. Brame joined the West Virginia National Guard. He remained in West Virginia to attend college and get a degree from West Virginia University. He remarked that adjusting to living back at home was hard. When he was overseas, walking was so quiet since he walked on sand the entire time. Once he came home, he returned to his normal habits and pastimes, which included hunting and spending long amounts of time outdoors. He soon realized how loud walking in the woods actually was. The 10 men that he spent the majority of his time with became very close, and he still spends time with them. There was another gentleman named Harry that served with Mr. Brame. After they left the service, he moved closer to Mr. Brame and his family just so they could spend more time together. Dusty and Harry were both also groomsmen at Justin's wedding. Mr. Brame received several medals for his service overseas, including the Army Commendation Medal. He received a few medals for his service, including the Global War on Terrorism Medal, along with the Global War on Terrorism Expeditionary Forces Ribbon. He was also awarded badges for expert driving in combat zones and good physical fitness scores. He was also given the Army Achievement Medal. While overseas, Mr. Brame was an E5 sergeant. He was in charge of a group of about 6 men. When he returned home, he was appointed to a staff sergeant, so he was put in charge of even more individuals. Mr. Brame said his main job was to make sure that all of the people under him made it home safe to their families. He was promoted to this rank by taking extra courses in learning about leadership. Mr. Brame left the Army after his 7-year enlistment was over. He decided to leave because he wasn't enjoying it anymore, and he didn't think that it was right for someone whose heart wasn't fully in it to be responsible for other people's lives. He also wanted to start a family. Since leaving the service, Mr. Brame attended college and got married. He now has 2 daughters who are 9 and 7, is employed by the American Water Authority in Harrisburg. He owns his own land and appreciates his ability to practice his religious freedom, and as he puts it, he's living the American dream. Today I want to thank Mr. Brame and all veterans that have served for their dedication and their service to our country.